James Flint was an 18th-century British merchant and diplomat employed by the East India Company and noted for his role in precipitating the Canton system of Chinese trade with the West. One of the first English people to learn the Chinese language, Flint broke Qing dynasty court protocol through a direct complaint to the Qianlong Emperor, which led to 3 years of detention in the Portuguese colony of Macau. In later life, he was jointly responsible for the introduction of the soybean to North America. Biography. Early life. Left in China as a teenage boy by Captain Rigby of the Honourable East India Company ship Normanton in 1736, Flint grew to adulthood speaking Mandarin Chinese. For reasons unknown, he adopted or was given the Chinese name Hongrenwei and in 1739 departed for Bombay and other East India Company-run locations. 3 years later he returned to China to continue his language studies, for which, according to scholar H.B. Morse, the company provided funding. As a result, some 136 years after its foundation, James Flint became the company's Chinese interpreter and the first such individual in British history. In 1741 he took up a position at the company factory in Canton where he considered British trade unsatisfactory even though at the time it surpassed that of the French and the Dutch. In 1746 Flint took passage on the company's ship Tavistock and became linguist to all our supercargoes in general, receiving 90 taels of silver per ship and accommodation at the company's factories. During the War of the Austrian Succession the company remained comparatively powerful and expanded its business in China. Nevertheless, its trade volume still lagged behind that of its combined European competitors. Under these circumstances the company became anxious to expand its trade into China's interior. With trading conditions in Canton unsatisfactory, the British decided to reopen the former trade in Ningbo and other northern ports. Flint affair. By the 1750s the British economy had undergone significant development such that Canton could no longer satisfy the trade volumes required by the East India Company. A group of foreign businessmen headed by Flint and already disgruntled by illegal extortion on the part of the Canton Customs Bureau stood ready to purchase large quantities of raw silk, tea and Nanking cloth from the point of origin or a port nearby. Between 1755 and 1757, Flint and his associates made successive sea voyages north to trade at Ningbo in Zhejiang province. Qing officials knew that allowing Sino-British commerce in Zhejiang would undoubtedly bring increased prosperity to the province and spur its development. However, given the length of time that foreign trade had been focused on Canton, a powerful interest group comprising the local Chinese merchants, customs officials and King's Collar bureaucrats had developed there. This faction enjoyed a monopoly on trade and its associated corruption and extortion from which it extracted the maximum benefit. They were naturally unwilling to allow any part of their interests in Canton to be transferred to the north. Meanwhile, Zhejiang possessed a number of potential foreign trade ports, but opening them up would have the unsettling side effect of creating additional responsibility for local officials. As a result, Zhang Yingzhu, Governor-General of Minzhi and responsible for Zhejiang, lobbied officials in Beijing for a prohibition of trade in Ningbo. In 1757, the Qianlong Emperor responded to pressure from his officials and implemented a new foreign trade policy whereby all ships from overseas were barred from every Chinese port with the exception of Canton, known in Chinese as Yiku Tongshang. The Canton system arose in part as a result of Flint's actions. Flint's complaint in Tianjin, with the East India Company unwilling to abide by this new prohibition. In May 1759, James Flint once again left Canton and sailed north for Ningbo. However, when he arrived in Dinghai, at the time known as Chusan, he found a contingent of the Qing army waiting, who advised him to return south. The next month Flint left Dinghai, but instead of returning to Canton, he made straight for Tianjin, then known as Shenzhen. On June 24, he arrived outside Tianjin and announced himself as an English official of the 4th grade, which would place him approximately halfway down the hierarchy of Chinese officialdom. He explained that he had previously traded in Guangdong and Macau, but that the merchant Li Guanghua had not paid the silver he owed. Flint continued that he had complained to Li Yongbao, the Guangdong customs supervisor, and Li Shilao, the governor-general of Liangguang, but they both had refused to listen to his grievances, so he came to Ningbo. Now, he said, at the behest of British officials, he had come to Tianjin to request that his complaint be heard in Beijing. The governor-general of Shili, whose jurisdiction extended over Tianjin, then undertook to report Flint's complaint to Qianlong. Thus began a diplomatic incident that would become known as the Flint Affair. On receipt of the complaint, Qianlong responded, "This matter concerning a foreign barbarian in the state must be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the clear laws of the Celestial Empire." The emperor went on to say that if Flint's complaint turned out to be true, Li Yongbao and the others responsible would be publicly executed. Accompanied by a specially chosen king official, Flint found himself rushed back to Canton by land, the first British subject to ever make that journey. The general commanding the troops in Fuzhou, Xinzhou, hurried to Guangdong to conduct the investigation. There, he and Qianlong's chosen official arrested Li Yongbao and Li Shilao, then confronted them with Flint's complaint, which listed 7 grievances. However, the Englishman's real purpose in coming to Ningbo in the first place was to break the single port commerce system and trade that he had clearly stated on arrival in Dinghai that the rear of his ship was packed with silver. While Flint was back in Canton, the British merchant ship Chesterfield arrived in the waters off Zhejiang, but its offer to trade met with a blunt refusal. The vessel's captain then claimed that he needed to stay for a few days to repair the ship's sails, but after a short standoff, the merchantman withdrew. Qianlong viewed the episode with suspicion. He believed that the ship's arrival was connected with Flint's complaint, which would serve as a distraction while his co-conspirator aboard the Chesterfield tried to open the ports of Zhejiang to trade. Qianlong's basis for deciding Flint's case focused on 3 principles. If the complaint of extortion and corruption proved true, Li Yongbao would be executed and the details made public. Any Chinese scoundrel who had assisted the Englishman in writing his petition would be executed on the spot. Flint's desire to travel from Canton to Tianjin to present a petition was abhorrent, but Flint should also refrain from informal criticism of state policy. According to written testimony from Li Shilao, Li Yongbao had not embezzled any government funds and had purchased goods on his own account for which he had not received compensation. Nevertheless, some of his relatives had taken delivery of goods from foreign traders and failed to pay for them. After deciding that Li Yongbao had been blackmailed by his relatives, Qianlong stripped him of his position and sent him into exile. Li's relatives, along with other implicated Guangdong customs officials, suffered varying degrees of punishment. The emperor further ruled that the Chinese authors of Flint's complaint were particularly heinous. After investigation and analysis of the document, Qianlong concluded that it had been written in collusion with Liu Yabian, a Sichuanese merchant, and subsequently edited by Lin Wan, a Fujianese translator employed by the East India Company in Batavia. Qianlong then ordered Li Shibiao to gather the Hong merchants in Canton, where where Liu Yabian was publicly executed as an object lesson in what would happen to Chinese citizens who aided barbarians. Despite Lin Wan's remote location, Qianlong secured his return to face punishment, and he too was executed. At the same time, he ordered the apprehension and interrogation of any members of Lin's family attempting to leave the country. The effect of the order was such that residents along the coast no longer dared to use their familiar sea routes to Jakarta. As for Flint, for the crime of barbarian collusion with Chinese scoundrels to create a petition that attempted to overthrow the single port trade system, Qianlong ordered him imprisoned in Macau for the term of 3 years. Thereafter, he would be deported from China and banished from the country forever. Had it so wished, the East India Company could have secured Flint's release on payment of a sum equal to $1,250 today. They chose not to, since it might encourage further exactions on the part of Chinese officials. Aftermath. In dealing with the 7 specific complaints in Flint's petition, the King Court outlawed the multiple forms of extortion in the form of gifts from merchants to officials known as gili, or customary charges. Chinese merchants owing the foreign traders silver would be pressured to pay taxes due on the provisions aboard a foreign ship on departure would be abolished, and the system of Chinese merchants standing surety for visiting traders would remain. Although Qianlong's punishment of Li Yongbao partially satisfied Flint's demands, forbidding extortion and the enforcing the rules of the merchant guarantee system hardly proved concessionary. Furthermore, Qianlong ordered the Grand Minister for Guangdong to inform the foreign traders that with all the rich produce available in China, there was no urgent need to acquire trifling products from abroad, a sentiment that he would echo several decades hence when he received the 1793 Macartney Embassy. The single port trading system based around Canton would remain in force, thus dashing Flint's hopes for the opening up of Zhejiang. Worse still, in order to keep a tighter rein on foreign traders in Canton, on the 24th of December 1759 the King Court proclaimed the vigilance towards foreign barbarian regulations, also known as the, which amongst other things forbade foreign trade in the winter and forced Western merchants to live in the 13 factories. After Flint's release he was taken to Whampoa, where he boarded the company's ship Horse and bound for England. In total, he earned £8,500 from 1760 to 66, £6,500 of which was from commission as a supercargo and £2,000 for hardships suffered, including his imprisonment for 3 years between December 1759 and November 1762. Introduction of the soybean to North America. During his years in China, Flint had ample opportunity to examine Chinese agriculture practices at first hand. As a result, on his return from the East he teamed up with fellow former East India Company employee Samuel Bowen, whom he had met on board the company's ship Success back in 1759, to introduce the soybean to North America. Bowen, possibly with funding from Flint, acquired land in Georgia where he produced soy sauce and soy vermicelli noodles. In 1770, Flint corresponded with noted U.S. statesman and scientist Benjamin Franklin on the subject of how the Chinese converted calavances into tofu. This is believed to be the first use of the word tofu in the English language.